back. I'm Austin Westfall. Let's get the latest on the Middle East. Joining us now is Dr. Alon Burstein. As always, Alon, it's good to see you. Basically, what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about a lot of things. And we got a couple of live images out of the Middle East, this one in Tel Aviv. The first thing I got to ask you is about an exclusive report from the Associated Press. They say the U.S. and Israel alone have reached out to officials of 3 East African governments to discuss using their territories as potential destinations for moving Palestinians uprooted from the Gaza Strip under President Trump's proposed post-war plan. That's according to American and Israeli officials. They told this again exclusively to the AP. The contacts with Sudan, Somalia, and the breakaway region of Somalia, known as Somaliland, illustrate that the White House and Israel are determined to relocate the people of Gaza. Alone, have we heard any Palestinian reaction to this news? And if not, how do they typically feel about proposals of this nature?
It's good to see you, Austin. We have to take this leak that came out today in context. Over the last weeks, we have seen a lot of different debates and proposals and ideas being thrown into the air about what is going to happen with the Trump plan, the effective removal or cleansing or expulsion or opening the gates, however you want to call it, of Palestinians to leave the Gaza Strip and to go elsewhere as part of a plan to rebuild it and create the Riviera of the Middle East. It's also important to note that since then, the United States has also held direct negotiations with Hamas. We have also seen other proposals about rebuilding the Gaza Strip with Hamas or the Palestinian Authority long term. Also, U.S. President Trump said in a meeting with the Irish Taoiseach, the Prime Minister, also that actually no one's going to be expelled from Gaza. So there's no clear trajectory about if this plan is going to be implemented. Within that context, within the context also of the faltering negotiations right now, that has to be taken into consideration when we come to understand this leak. This leak now is Israel and the United States very likely trying to just throw up into the air and say, hey, just reminding everyone, this plan is still out there. There's all kinds of negotiations going on, negotiations, Adam Boehler's holding negotiations, Steve Witkoff's holding negotiations, the Arab League's holding negotiations. But just remember, we're still actually talking about this. We're still actually pursuing this. The talks were held reportedly, as you said, with Sudan, Somalia, and Somaliland. Sudan officially rejected the idea already. Somalia unofficially rejected the idea already. Somaliland is the most interesting one because they really would like to curry favor with the United States at this point, so they haven't said anything. But other than that, we haven't seen any reactions. We haven't seen any reactions from Palestinian Authority or Hamas to this specifically. We've seen them outright reject these ideas before. The Arab League has outright rejected the idea. I don't necessarily say that this approach to the East African states didn't happen. I say that it is not necessarily an indication that the plan is being pursued. What it is more an indication that Israel and the United States would like to remind the Palestinian side, Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, that they still could pursue this. If that was the case, it'll have to go a lot further than this generic approach to these states and the states saying no, and maybe not be much further. So I read this leak today in the Associated Press within that context.
Why might they single out those 3 territories?
So there are historical connections between the different Palestinian factions and Sudan under the previous administration, but it is possible that there is some hope that there might be a connection between maybe some Palestinian leadership still and Sudanese officials. Somalia is unto itself a failed state. It's, some might say, a collapsed state, and it is very likely that the United States and Israel would be looking at it and saying, look, the faltering regime there would possibly like to gain favor with Israel and the United States. What do they care? Their state's in disarray anyway, right? We have to understand, if it came to the United States and it said, take 2 million refugees from Gaza and put them somewhere in the United States, put them in Texas, put them in New York, put them wherever, these countries are not likely to want that. In turn, if you are a collapsed state and you, as is, don't have a lot of control over your different regions, possibly you might be more open to say, sure, relocate refugees to one of the areas we anyway don't have control over, and in turn, vote with us in the UN, give us all kinds of aid, services, weapons, etc. Somaliland is the interesting one, and initially it was also reported that Israel was thinking of Puntland, which is another area in Somalia. And the reason that that is interesting is because those are 2 areas that have declared, to some extent, independence. One of them declared independence from Somalia. The other one declared, sort of autonomy from Somalia. And they have been seeking recognition. They've been seeking recognition from different world powers. And a little bit like under the previous Trump administration, when the president recognized Morocco's dominance over some of the Sahara Desert, the area that Morocco had occupied, but the United States, in exchange for Morocco having normalization talks with Israel, the Abraham Accords, the United States recognized that Morocco owns this territory. Possibly there's a hope that by approaching Somaliland and saying, if you will take Palestinians, maybe we'll recognize your independence. Again, that's speculation on my part. It just is not surprising to me that they're specifically approaching places that either have some sort of historic ties with Palestinians or have a need to have recognition or assistance from the United States or Israel, for that matter, which also could be a big supplier of weapons or things like that.
Something that I know you saw today, this reporting coming out about Hamas agreeing to release Eden Alexander. That's the last living American hostage in captivity in the Gaza Strip. Alexander, who is a 21-year-old Israeli American, will be released along with the bodies of 4 other hostages, according to a deal offered by mediators. As of today, Alexander has been held captive alone for 525 days. Is he for sure coming home? Is it that simple, Alon?
Unfortunately, I'll say it's far from sure. What has happened is, again, there's been a couple of different channels of negotiations that have been opened. And I just want to back up a little bit and say, where are we in the deal? You know, the ceasefire, the truce, the first phase officially ended on March 1st. And since then, right now, we're in pretty much officially a state of limbo. On the one hand, the deal says that the truce is to be extended as long as negotiations over phase 2 are happening. And those negotiations are supposed to be about a complete ceasefire, return of all hostages, release Palestinian prisoners, end to the war. On the other hand, those negotiations are not actually happening. Both sides have not actually moved forward with them. Israel officially never sent a delegation, or it sent a delegation only a day before the ceasefire was ending, in order to negotiate phase 2. So the truce is right now being maintained, even though those negotiations aren't actually happening. It's a state of limbo. Within that context, also, Israel has cut off the entrance of aid into the Gaza Strip, which some have said is a violation of the deal. Others have said, no, the deal, again, officially ended, so Israel's not obligated to that. And then within that, there have been a couple different channels. Different actors have been talking to Hamas, among others, Egypt and Qatar, as typically. But the interesting one also was the United States. The United States, under the special envoy to hostage affairs, Adam Boehler, held direct talks with Hamas, among others, over the release of the American hostages, or, according to Boehler, even a much larger deal, the release of all hostages, Hamas disarming, a 5 to 10-year ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, rebuilding, and things like that. Now, once those talks went public, there was crisis in Israel because the negotiations were happening essentially over Israel's head. And I don't exactly know what happened because it wasn't made public, but a few days later, it was declared that Adam Boehler has been removed from being the negotiator that's going to talk about hostages with Hamas and in the Gaza Strip. Then all of a sudden, 3-4 days later, Hamas comes out with this announcement today that actually it is willing to release the American hostage, Eden Alexander, and the bodies of 4 hostages. They didn't make that clear, but there are bodies of 4 more hostages that are American citizens, so very clearly they would be them. Hamas is likely trying to signal to the United States, look, we could still have a deal. You could still talk to us. You walked away from this, that's okay, but we actually are willing to move forward with this and to move the pressure onto Israel. Now, Israel has to say, are they going to accept moving forward with this? Hamas didn't say what they're demanding in return. There were leaks from Al Jazeera that we could talk about what Hamas might demand in return. But Israel would either have to say that they're willing to move forward with this, which is something that was done above Israel's head and cutting Israel out of the deal, so to speak, or Israel has to officially reject not only the release of its hostage, but the release of an American hostage, which is a slap in the face to the United States and would probably be perceived that way by the U.S. president. So from Hamas's point of view, I think they floated this as a way to move the pressure on Israel's side and try to revive ongoing negotiations between Hamas and the United States.
So, you know this. We've been asking our audience to send in some questions. This is today's question. Unfortunately, the ending gets cut off, but I'll ask you this first part of it here. After the resolution, Cami asks, by the way, after the resolution of the Gaza war, how necessary will it be for the U.S. to serve as a peacekeeper within the region and assist with rebuilding efforts? There's, of course, Alon, lots of questions out there about who will even be in charge of rebuilding it. But what will be the U.S.'s involvement?
It's a great question. Obviously, it's contingent on how the war will be resolved, right? To some extent within Israel's cabinet, the resolution of the war means not only defeat of Hamas, but Israel reoccupying the Gaza Strip and rebuilding Israeli settlements there. If that be the case, then there's direct occupation in the Gaza Strip. Israel's in control. The United States theoretically has no involvement. In turn, other visions, like of the Arab League, are a declaration, and by the way, of the deal that the United States also put forward, is that phase two has an declared end to the war, an Israeli withdrawal, and Gaza rebuilding. Israel's not in control then, and then it's much more open who will be the one that enforces the ongoing peace treaty or at least ceasefire between the sides. Will it be direct U.S. involvement? I highly doubt it. Certainly under President Trump, I highly doubt it. Trump is not interested, seemingly, in getting the United States more involved in playing an active role, sending troops abroad. It's just a way to embroil the United States into more and more problems. Historically, though, when it comes to peacekeeping missions and rebuilding missions in the Middle East, usually it is much more the involvement of the United Nations. We have in southern Lebanon UNIFIL, a mission of the United Nations that is made up of lots of different countries. Southern Syria, UNDORF, another mission. We had also between Israel and Egypt in the past, another mission. There's a lot of mistrust within Israel of UN missions because of historic reasons that the UN failed to actually stop war from breaking out. In turn, there's also mistrust among Palestinians of the United States and other forces that are very often seen as allied with Israel, so just an extension of Israel. To some extent, I'll say that if we have a resolution of the war that does not involve Israeli direct occupation and control of the Gaza Strip, likely we will see a coalition of lots of different forces. I imagine that it will include some European forces that have more trust among the Palestinians, some maybe Arab forces that are more friendly to Israel, like possibly Egypt or Jordan. And likely we will see the United States having sort of an overarching authority in maybe coordinating the efforts or discussing who exactly has zones of control, etc. Will we see U.S. troops on the ground actually enforcing it? I'd be very surprised, again, especially under this administration, and also because it would not be seen by the Palestinian side as a neutral party that is enforcing it. So probably the United States would play more of a supervisory role in the future Gaza Strip if that is the trajectory.
Time will tell. The encyclopedic Alon Burstein, as always. Appreciate you. We'll see you soon. You can follow Alon on Twitter, by the way. I don't know why I said Twitter there, Alon. I've plugged you so many times, and the word Twitter has never come out of my mouth. We can plug your personal YouTube channel. That's where you upload your Middle East updates every so often. And I know you've been busy with your newborn, so thanks for coming on and still being as encyclopedic as ever, even despite the sleep. Good to see you, Alon. Talk soon.
Thank you. Have a good night.